In this episode, I'm going to show you how to take the lowly Cyclops and make it a more interesting monster for your players to encounter and to integrate into the storylines of your world. But first, it's time to announce the winner of my giveaway on Volo's Guide to Ghosts. I had some great comments. I loved all the likes. So the winner of the giveaway, taken from the comments that you gave, is Felipe Ria. Felipe will win one copy of Volo's Guide to Ghosts from the Dungeon Masters Guild website. Congratulations, Felipe. And thank you so much, all of you, for your comments and likes. I really appreciate it. Hello gang, KR King here again with my YouTube channel dedicated to homebrewing a campaign. So as I said, I'm going to use the Cyclops as my example for changing the stats up on a monster because I think the monster manual really gives them short shrift. You know, they're in the monster pantheon because of the history with Greek mythology, you know, fighting Odysseus on his travels. But even from there, they've been shrunk down. They used to be super giant when they fought Odysseus. Now they're kind of, you know, poor man's hill giant. It's a one-eyed giant with depth perception problems. When you look in the manual, it gets even worse. Their base trait headings are non-religious, unsophisticated, and unwise. So the Cyclops have no religious affiliation, yet they're easily impressed by anyone that, you know, shows magic or whatever, and they become in awe, and then they get real mad when they realize it's just a person. They're unsophisticated, so they live in crappy homes. They don't use money, and they barely communicate. They just grunt at each other like animals. They're unwise. They don't use strategy when they fight. They always make bad decisions. However, and this is very important when you think about the homebrewing a creature, the Cyclops, unlike the hill giants, have an almost childlike reaction to things. Yes, they're ill-tempered, but it's because they just want to be left alone. They just want to go off in some remote area, raise their animals, and not be bothered by people, unlike hill giants who are nasty, looking out for trouble. And I think this sort of childlike quality is really good in terms of thinking about ways to improve their characteristics and make them more interesting. So when you're looking at the Cyclops stat line, it's clear that their main weakness is in intelligence and wisdom. So that's the first area you think about tweaking to make them a little more powerful and interesting, which will then lead to other abilities and things. Because without intelligence, they're not going to think about themselves and the world around them in any meaningful way. And without wisdom, it means whatever thoughts they have, they're not going to be applied to the world, the events around them, in a way that's accurate or constructive. And by raising these characteristics, the motivations and desires of the Cyclops, which is what drives all the action and conflict in your game, becomes more sophisticated and interesting. And for your players, the storylines and interactions, encounters with the Cyclops are also more interesting because these desires and motivations are more sophisticated. But you want to think about what's the method or storyline that I'm going to use to justify my increasing the stat line on the Cyclops. Well, the first one is pretty obvious. It's the old act of God in which, look, I'm the GM. I decided to make the Cyclops better. I raised their statistics. There you go. Nothing. I'm not going to give you any more reasons. And the players just kind of go along and go, oh, okay, in his world, the Cyclops is more powerful. I get it. But I think you're missing some opportunities when you choose this method. Because if we take the stats in the monster manual as kind of a point of departure about how people and monsters in the world would think about the Cyclops, when they would run into one that's so clearly advanced from what they thought or had heard about, they're going to wonder, what's the story here, right? Why are these Cyclops so much smarter or wiser than other Cyclops? Why are they using these weapons and tactics, right? So when you think of a method to explain that, you create a whole storyline and possible encounters and things that make the world more interesting. So one idea to explain this is the Einstein Effect. And that is, in any population, there's going to be people that are incredibly intelligent, incredibly wise, right? Just in a genetic anomaly. This is why we produce Shakespeare's and Beethoven's. When you have wise people, you have Gandhi or the Buddha or something. Why can't you have that in a Cyclops community? So a Cyclops with a 16 intelligence may rise up to leadership within the tribe, may start making decisions that advance that tribe. They may recognize someone in the tribe who has great wisdom that could become, you know, a healer or someone who gives advice in terms of how they should interact with other tribes. They may unite all the tribes. If you have someone that's a great military leader, a sort of Alexander the Great, the battle tactic is going to be improved. Again, the uniting of the tribes, and that person may pick a wise person to start coming up with laws for the tribe and go to something more sophisticated. The great genius may learn to read. You could also have access to spell casting and whatnot. The options here just expand upon themselves when you think, hey, why can't there be a super genius Cyclops? It might be super rare, it might not be as high as other races, but certainly it could happen, and it's a great justification to increase their stats and make them more interesting. Another catalyst for change is the artifact, in which a Cyclops or group of Cyclops come across some artifact that transforms them. I mean, this could be some artifact that directly bestows intelligence or wisdom, a helm or some kind of amulet or something. It could be a weapon with sentience, say a giant's greatsword, that not only communicates to the user, but boosts their stats, teaches them how to read and write, teaches them about the history and lore of the world and the place of the Cyclops, gives them ideas of where the Cyclops could go. And then, of course, there's a story behind the artifact. How did it get here? How did it get lost or whatever? Is it an evil artifact with its own designs like the ring in Lord of the Rings? Is it a good item, a sentient weapon that realizes these Cyclops are totally downtrodden? I want to help them. I want to raise them up. And then when the players find out about this artifact, what do they do? If it's an evil artifact, do they take it away from the Cyclopses? And then what happens to them? Do they lose their powers? But yet it's for the greater good of the world, we need to stop this item. And of course, the artifacts lead to not only storylines, but other entities that might be searching for this artifact. Even if it's a good one, evil things may go, I want a part of that. Because remember, the discovery of the Cyclopses that have been affected by this artifact is going to be by the players, not other people in the world. They always start things in action. So when they realize, the Cyclops, they seem to be advanced, but we parlayed with them and moved on, now that artifact is in the world. Now things begin to happen. Another great storyline in terms of transforming a primitive people is the visitor. This is where a person or a group from a more sophisticated culture comes into contact with the primitive one and transforms it. They teach them things. They give them insight into ideas or objects or, mechanics that they never thought possible. Now, they might arrive in a missionary kind of sense where they come specifically to raise up this primitive group. But they also might come there accidentally. The survivors of some catastrophe, survivors of a shipwreck, something like that, coming through a different plane of existence and being trapped here or whatever. The shipwreck victim is, almost dies and is kind of nursed back to health for whatever reason by the Cyclops, right? And as you'll see with all these ideas, you can mix and match them. So the visitor comes, let's say it's the survivor of a shipwreck, and after they're nursed back to health, they realize there's this genius in this group who's a natural leader. They befriend them, they teach them things, and they can use the information given by the visitor to expand upon the Cyclops' general knowledge. The visitor may recognize that someone in the group has great wisdom. They could be a spiritual person. They could have access to some deity, one the visitor worships or something else, but suddenly they have clerical powers. The visitor could have martial skills, and they could unite the Cyclops tribes or teach them methodology, give them new weapons, new weaponry to fight other Cyclops. Same thing with the martial genius. You don't have to have the Cyclops always using the same weaponry that's given in the book. As they gain in power, they could start using other, great swords or battle axes and things like that instead of just the crude club. As I suggested, they could teach them magic, whether it's wild magic, maybe it's a warlock with some pack that they can give to the Cyclops. Now, the visitor can be long gone, or they can be there when the player characters come into contact with the Cyclops. And what are the intentions of the visitor? If it's an evil person or they have some revenge thing in mind, maybe they're using the Cyclopses for their own reason. And even if they're long gone, that influence can still remain. What are the gods that the Cyclops worship? What are their goals? What are their entities? Same thing with an artifact, even if it did transform the Cyclopses and is now the power ran out or whatever, what after effect does it have? Same thing with the visitor. Now, related to the visitor, but I think different in very profound ways, is the entity. And this is where the Cyclopses come into contact with some entity. Let's say it's from another plane. There's some gateway, or maybe it's trapped here or something. But it isn't just a person on the material plane. It is from some foreign place. It came from, what its intentions are. Are there other entities from this place trying to work their way through, and they found some, forgotten little gateway that now these Cyclopses, for whatever reason, were living there or something. Because again, when the players encounter the Cyclopses that are clearly, new and improved Cyclopses, and then they find out that, we talked to the companion. Where is this? In the cave of sounds or something. You go there and you realize there's some creature in here or something. How does the creature react? Does it take them as a threat? Does it have powers of its own? Does it imbue the Cyclopses with certain powers? And these things can last. Even if the players destroy the entity, maybe the Cyclopses have been changed for good or ill. Now that they're more intelligent, maybe they'll become a different sort of Cyclops. Or do they go back to their crude, brutish ways, and even though the players stop this entity from, creating a permanent hole or sending its minions through this planar gate, unfortunately the Cyclops had to go back to being idiots. That's how the cookie crumbles sometimes. And then you have the deity, in which the Cyclopses do worship some deity that in return can increase their stats, make them more intelligent, certainly more wise, and give them powers, priestly stuff. Could be a lost god that has been totally forgotten on the material plane until the Cyclops come across some artifact or some item that links them to this god. It could be the genius thing again. So wise and whatever that they see something in nature, they call out, or just the fact that when they make these prayers or whatever, some god notices them, so they recognize their genius for this and speaks to them. They have a vision or a series of them. They form a new religion among the Cyclops, the Order of the Single Eye type thing. And they gain powers as a cleric. The gods give them gifts in terms of enhancing their wisdom even farther and giving them the wisdom to see other members of their group that might have more powers, increasing the stock and the capabilities of the Cyclopses. And this deity angle, I think, is where the sort of childlike nature of the Cyclopses, as opposed to, say, hill giants, comes in, because I think a deity seeing this very wise genius, or just coming across them through an artifact or just some random thing, sees in the Cyclopses some clay that they can work with more easily. They can see that they are redeemable. And in fact, they may also feel sorry for them, that they're in such a negative place in terms of the hierarchy of creatures in this material plane, and want to help them, want to right a wrong that they see. Now, again, it may be some chaotic god, it may be a trickster god like Loki or something that finds the whole plight of the Cyclopses and the fact that it's going to change them and alter things very amusing and wants to just see what happens. You decide that, you think about what makes sense. Again, if you're combining this with, artifact or a genius person within the Cyclops, who would they be drawn to, that kind of thing. So there's some ideas that you can use to bump up the stats of the Cyclops and make it more interesting for your players to run into and encounter in storyline. Another thing that this does is it increases the opportunities for role-playing among your characters. Because if you run into a group of Cyclops now, you're just going to fight them or scare them off or whatever, but there's not going to be any kind of interaction that's worthwhile. Whereas when you've bumped up their stats, you've created these different powers or abilities, suddenly they're a part of your world, suddenly they know things about the world, knowledge of the artifact, the new god, whatever it is, the visitor that came, and they're going to give your characters a storyline, and they may befriend your characters or become an ally, or at least, a neutral sort of force. There's somebody in the world that means something. And as I said, take some of these ideas, mix and match them, because you can do this for all sorts of monsters, because it lends nuance to your world, it makes it unique, which is what you're going for with a homebrewed world anyway. It's coming out of your imagination, your storytelling, so why shouldn't your monsters? And the thing about creating these unique monsters is that you let your players know that no matter how detailed their knowledge of the monster manual, they're going to run into stuff they've never seen. They're going to have to be on their toes. They're going to have to think about, how do I role play this? What are the strategies? These Cyclopses are going to use military strategies that are way advanced for what I thought they were. Makes the encounters, makes the stories more interesting. So if you've liked what you've seen, please subscribe. Please leave comments. Tell me about monsters that you've homebrewed in your campaign, changes you made. I'd love to hear of people, if you're going to take these Cyclopses and do what I'd say, I'd love to hear those stories. One of my favorite things. But in the meantime, as always, keep playing D&D, my friends, and tell somebody else about it.